Caressa sent me this article, um, and basically it's gonna put to rest. Well, it's not really gonna put to rest because he's still gonna have PC that's gonna fight against it. Where they come out and always say that it's most likely more white people to get killed or murdered by the police than black people is. Well, this article just came out, and it seems like they constantly have to do a whole bunch of studies to basically back this up, because every time they do a study, it always backs up the claim that we get killed more than they do, even though it's more of them in the establishment. So I'm going to go ahead and read this article. It says the research is clear. White people are not more likely than black people to be killed by police. When he was asked this week why black people are still dying at the hands of law enforcement in the U.S., 45 responded by focusing on white people who had been killed by police. So are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people, 45 told CBS News in an interview Tuesday. More white people, by the way, more white people. And that's the only thing he could say. It almost sounds real dismissive. Northeastern professor Matt Miller says that Trump's response was a grotesque misdirection that fails to account for the fact that black people are killed by police at a higher rate than white people. A recent study by Miller found that black people are shot and killed by police at twice the rate that white people are. He is using the truth to tell a lie, Miller says of Trump, or at the very least to mislead, which in either case shows an indifference to the critical question, why are black people still dying at the hands of law enforcement? Overall, close to 1,000 people are shot to death by police officers in the U.S. every year. And before I go any further, I can almost bet right now that in the comment section they're going to mention something about Chicago. They're going to talk about black on black crime and this, that, and the third, which has absolutely nothing to do with what they're talking about. But, they have to use that as a dog whistle to deflect. Overall, close to 1,000 people are shot to death by police officers in the U.S. every year, according to a database maintained by the Washington Post. It is true that a majority of those victims are white people. That's only because there are so many more white people than there are black people in our country, says Miller, a professor of health and sciences and epidemiology who had been researching injury and violence prevention for 2 decades. Miller participated in a Northeastern Harvard data-driven study that combed through shooting deaths by police across 27 states in 2014 through 2015. Based on details called from police and medical examiner reports by the National Violent Death Reporting System, it found that black people were killed at a rate higher than their proportion to the national population. Although black people represent allegedly 12% of the population in the states we study, they made up 25% of the deaths in shootings by police. By comparison, Miller says white people represent 62% of the population and made up 54% of the deaths in encounters with police. Instead of approaching the study with a point of view to be proved or disproved, Miller and his fellow researchers set out a fact-finding mission. They analyzed the 2-year database of 603 firearm homicides by police. They tagged and coded the narratives to put each shooting into context, and then ran the detailed results through a computer program, a meticulous process that took 2 years to complete. The study found that the racial disparity was even more pronounced in those cases in which the victims were unarmed and offered minimal to no threat to police. In those instances in which the victim appeared to pose a minimal or less threat to police based on the data we had, black people were 3 times as likely to be killed. That doesn't mean the police didn't feel threatened, but based on the reports that we were able to look at, a very low level of threat was directed at the police. And in those specific cases, the numbers rose for black people. They made up 36% of the deaths. Miller added that his study, which was released in March, was not an outlier on the issue of race in police shootings. Many other studies have shown that black people are more likely to be killed per capita by law enforcement than are white people in the United States. That is not a disputed statistic. Miller categorizes Trump's statement as a misleading attempt to dismiss the question. And that's what I said. I said it sounds very dismissive. The question asks why black people are still dying, and it was an opportunity to grapple with the underlying process. If you think it's a problem that police are shooting and killing people whether they are white or black, then you want to understand why this is happening, because that is the first step to trying to prevent it. Trump's lack of curiosity about why this is happening is indicative of not really caring about getting to the bottom of the problem. You can't solve a problem unless you know what the problem is in the first place. It would have been okay to answer the question by saying, I don't know, but we need to get to the bottom of it. That would have been an honest response, but to respond in a way that creates greater divisions and minimizes the toll on black men and women is an obscene use of statistics. I would have to agree with him. Like when I had read that and looked at 45's response, I said it was very dismissive. Like he just didn't care, but you know, that doesn't surprise me. It pretty much backs up what his niece has been saying about him and that family for a while, and especially in that tell-all that she wrote or wherever that information was. But I already know because see, 45, he speaks for the people, and y'all know who I'm talking about when I say the people, because they're very dismissive of it as well. Like I said, they'll bring up black on black crime. They'll bring up Chicago. Then they'll throw that intraracial crime on there where they said we are attacking them more. The whole thing now with Nick Cannon and everything like that, and saying we're the most anti-Semitic. You know, they're going to do all of that and deflect when none of what they're saying has anything to do with any type of studies that are put out there right now. Like that's basically what they're going to do. It's a wash, rinse, and repeat. That's why I say they can do as many studies as they want, but if they're going to constantly be dismissive of it, it gets boring over time. I mean, I'm glad that they're continuing to put these studies out there, but the thing is, we already know. At this point, you're just preaching to the choir. And it's no point in trying to convince them otherwise because they're not going to listen. That's why opioids and low birth rates and this virus is doing them in heavily right now. So I say, just let nature take its course. Like I said, we already know this. We know that we are very heavily affected when it comes to police brutality and everything like that. Hell, even when we are affected by police brutality and the stuff is clearly on screen, they'll still dismiss it as, oh, they shouldn't have been resisting and they shouldn't have been doing this. They should have been doing that. But they'll turn a blind eye when someone who looks like them does worse and just dismiss that as well. They're a very dismissive group. They're very dismissive of anyone's pain that is not their own for the most part. But when it seems to me, they're even dismissive of their own if it comes to law enforcement, because they always have to be on their side. Look at how they acted when the idea of defunding the police came in. They looked like they wanted to cry because their little line of defense was about to fade away on them. That's really why they was upset. Even if the police needed to be defunded, they were still upset because it was starting to affect their way of living. That's really all it boils down to.